So my name is David Wells, Davidwells. I am the son of James A. Neininger Jr., who was a rescue mechanic on U.S. Coast Guard 1363, December 22nd, 1964, the date of the flood.
You answered about 4 of my questions there. That was good.
Great.
So how old were you during the 1960s?
I was 5 months old. I was born July 20th of 64, so I was 5 months old when the Christmas flood happened. I lived in South San Francisco with my mother, my father, my sister and brother. He was stationed at the Coast Guard Air Station at SFO at the time, and he was part of a crew with Donald Prince was the captain, and there was Lieutenant Alan Altree of the Royal Canadian Navy, who was seconded to the U.S. Coast Guard at the time.
How does the Royal Canadian Navy enter into this mix with the Coast Guard?
I suppose, I don't know a lot of the details, but I suppose there's a program of exchanging officers between the two bodies, between the Canadian Navy and the U.S. Coast Guard, probably the U.S. Navy as well.
And how old were your siblings?
So my sister's 3 years older than me, and my brother was 5 years older than me.
So just a bunch of little ones at home with your mom.
A bunch of little ones, yeah. Yeah, it was pretty tough for my mom, obviously. You know, she, right at Christmas time, found herself suddenly widowed with 3 small children, and that was very hard for her, obviously.
Did she have much support in terms of other family who was around?
Not here in the area, actually. We're from the southeast, so her family was in Jacksonville, Florida. His family was from Virginia. So we went back. We went back east immediately after this happened. My father had joined the Coast Guard there in Florida and then had gone through training and been transferred to San Francisco, just in time for me to be born here. So I'm one of the few true California natives, actually. When the Great Expulsion happens, I get to stay.
I like that. It's always in Oregon they're talking about getting rid of Californians anyway, so.
Yes, I know when I lived in Colorado for a few years, I heard a lot about the Californication of their state. Yeah.
They're all Californians who are saying that, so, you know.
Yeah, but they came first, so I don't know. I don't know what the pecking order is.
And so your dad was actually stationed in South San Francisco?
Yes.
And then where did he stay when do you know anything about where he stayed when he was?
Well, we had a small house. I think they rented a small house in South San Francisco. I think the Coast Guard Air Station is or was actually at the SFO airport. I think it may still be there, in fact. And so that's where he worked, but we lived in a small house in South San Francisco.
And then when he was, do you know how long he was up north? Did he get transferred up there right after the...
He wasn't transferred. They were dispatched the morning of December 22nd from SFO. So when the flood happened, virtually every branch of the armed services were called to render aid in Humboldt County. And not only Humboldt County, but really the entire coast beyond Oregon, Washington. There was flooding all up and down the West Coast because of that weather event that happened. So I know that there were Marine choppers, there were Navy choppers, and Coast Guard. Several Coast Guard choppers from different stations in California were sent north to try to render aid to flood victims.
Wow, I didn't realize until you just told me that, because reading all the things that I've read, I've never seen that piece of information. I thought that people were sent up there for a period of maybe 2 weeks or something. I didn't realize they weren't flying.
Well, it's possible that they would have been, in fact, and I know that other crews did spend weeks in the area, obviously. What they did the morning of the 22nd was very...
I'm sorry, I'm going to stop.
Getting ahead? Okay. It's the ocean.
It is.
The ocean has that effect.
We get that up at our
Yeah,
place,
I'm sure you do.
Well, I'm wondering. Oh, it sounds pretty good now. Okay.
Okay. So as the story has been related to me, it was very early, wee hours of the morning on the 22nd when he was alerted, and they were dispatched very early in the morning. They flew north, went straight to Arcata, to the airport, to take on fuel. And in fact, there's a photograph of them lifting off from Arcata after they had refueled. And I think it was at that moment that they took on a local farmer named Bud Hansen He was serving as a spotter. He knew the area very well. He knew where the low-lying areas were, where people were likely to be in distress. So he helped them. They began operating principally around Ferndale, in and around Ferndale. I think that they rescued, a dozen or so people during the course of the day, flew many sorties. Last sortie was apparently a very difficult extraction. So late in the afternoon, the storm had continued all through the day. Very, very heavy rains, very heavy winds. Some of the extractions, they were either picking people up off of rooftops or sometimes second-story windows from their homes. And of course, the proximity of power lines was a major problem. That last extraction, I think, took them longer than they counted on, because all day long they had been picking people up, taking them to the fairgrounds, going out looking for more people, taking them to the fairgrounds where they'd be safe. I think this last extraction took longer than they had counted on, because they took on 2 women and a baby from the Bonson farm in Ferndale. Betty Kemp, her baby Melanie Kemp, and Marie Bonson. Second-story window. I think there were power lines nearby. Really tough to get the people out of the house and on board the aircraft. And they did not stop at the fairgrounds. They made straight for the Arcata Airport. I haven't really seen a sort of official report, but my theory is that I think they must have been really critically low on fuel at that moment, because it's the only reason why I could see that they wouldn't stop at the fairgrounds with these 4 civilians on board. They made straight for the airport. Unfortunately, the power had failed at the Arcata Airport by this time, so the instrument landing system was not functioning, and they'd lost the light by this time. So they struggled to locate the Arcata Airport. It appears that they followed what they thought was the visual beacon, the light beacon from the airport, and it actually turned out to be the Trinidad Lighthouse. When they realized where they were in radio contact with the airport. They got radar vectors. They wheeled back around. I think Trinidad is, beyond north, perhaps northwest of the airport. They wheeled back around towards the southeast, but they never made it. I don't know the official report on the cause of the crash. My belief is they simply ran out of fuel. I've actually been to the crash site. The fuselage of the aircraft is still there. It's timber company land. They have never extracted the aircraft. They've left it out of respect for those who lost their lives. There's no sign of any fire in the crash. I think they ran out of time. They ran out of fuel, couldn't get back to the airport in time.
Yeah, you would think that it would have all burned if they'd had fuel on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it's, it looks, although a lot of the forest frankly has been removed since then. At the time, apparently, it was a very, very dense forest. Took days for people to find the crash site. A lot of that's gone now, but I mean, it looks like it was, from the trees that are still there, it's fairly uniform. It's not as if there was, one giant redwood peeking up from a bunch of lodgepole pines or something. It was pretty uniform forest. I think they just ran out of time.
What was his job as rescue mechanic? What do rescue mechanics do aboard a helicopter?
Well, I think in the Coast Guard, generally speaking, people have multiple jobs. So they have an everyday, day in, day out job, and then they have a function that they fulfill when they're on a mission. So he was actually...
I'm sorry, we're just getting a little bit too much.
No worries,
in there.
no worries.
Stop it. I was doing that to the stellars
Cut.
during one of the shoots. It's like, stop it.
Cut.
The cicadas at another one. Stop it.
I think you've got the tough job there.
Okay, I think we'll go ahead.
So as I understand in the Coast Guard, basically everyone has multiple jobs. They have a job that they do day in, day out. My father's was aircraft electrician. And then during a rescue mission, his function was rescue mechanic. So he was actually in the back of the aircraft. In fact, if the photo with the aircraft lifting off at Arcata, you can sort of see him standing in the open doorway of the aircraft. And he would operate the winch. He would assist with actual recovery of the victims, render aid if they needed first aid, if they needed blankets, he'd take care of them, get them situated in the aircraft. That's the function that he fulfilled during the mission.
Some of the questions, I wasn't sure how old you were at the time, so it's like some of these things you're not going to remember.
Yeah, no, I really have no memory of my father at all. I mean, I've heard stories from my sister and brother, my older siblings. He was apparently well liked by everybody, jovial guy, loved playing with his kids. So I guess my dad was a great guy.
Yeah. So your mom, tell us about like kind of how that affected. I mean, it's like obvious. It's just,
Yeah,
you
no,
know,
it
so
was pretty devastating for her. In fact, we participated in a memorial event 10 years ago, the 40th anniversary of this. I had actually gone up to Humboldt County really to try to learn more about it, because the fact is we never really talked about it at all when I was a child. It was very, very traumatic for my mother to suffer that loss. In fact, I never even saw a photograph of my father until I was about 16 or 17 years old. So I really wanted to learn about this. At the time I was living here in the Bay Area, seeing the 40th anniversary approaching. So I spent some time up in Humboldt County. The Humboldt County Historical Society provided me a lot of background that I didn't know. The Coast Guard was incredibly gracious in greeting us at the McKinleyville Air Station. Actually collaborated a little bit with some of the local residents in Ferndale who mounted a memorial event that was incredibly touching. There were just hundreds and hundreds of people there. I got to meet some of the people that my father's crew actually rescued, which was really very touching. Got to see the memorial. There is a memorial still to this day to 3 different crews that have been lost out of the McKinleyville Air Station. I think it was partly as a consequence of this flood that the Coast Guard created the McKinleyville Air Station. It wasn't there at the time, and I think they realized that there was really a gap in coverage and support for the community.
It's like the wind swirling now behind and hitting the mic again.
So what did you actually ask me? I can't remember if I'm answering your question or not.
Your family and
my
like your
family,
mom,
yeah.
how she. So you guys moved.
So we went back home. She went back home. Basically, it was a terrible tragedy for her. A 21-year-old widow with 3 children, and she didn't have any support here in the area. I think we had only been here for about a year, actually. So she went back home to Jacksonville, where her parents were, and got a lot of support from them. Went to college, got a college degree, got a graduate degree. Had a nice long career as a teacher of math and biology.
And then did she meet someone else?
Yes, she did. She did remarry. I had a stepfather. We're not going to talk very much about that, though.
We'll need to.
Yeah,
okay.
That's maybe the least happy part of an unhappy story, to be honest.
Yeah, we'll just leave that one.
Yeah.
So you went up to the wreckage up at Patrick. Well, it's actually Trinidad area up there.
The Trinidad area,
And
that's right.
How did you even find it?
Well, we were aided in that. So as I mentioned, there was a local farmer named Arnold Hansen.
Sorry. I asked you to start, and then I got a plane going.
That's okay. That's okay. The vagaries of filming out. Yeah, relax the arms for a minute.
Really, it's just relax. Talk, like
Yeah, the blood's all running down your arms into you.
Blood in your fingers
almost
again.
out, right?
What's that?
The shade, it's almost.
Yeah, actually, I don't think that's needed anymore.
Yeah, 'cause
to
the
be
diffuse
honest,
light looks
yeah.
more
Is
sane.
it? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I have to wait for the wind again.
I'm gonna wait a second for this next breeze to
Yeah.
finish itself.
It's not being cooperative.
Yeah, it's the vagaries of filming outdoors.
Yeah. I went online. It was like 18-mile-an-hour winds down to San Francisco. No.
But in general, the outdoor shoots look so much nicer.
They do.
With the natural light,
do.
yeah.
the light
I'm
is
sure
so
that's
much
true.
better. Okay. Well, so tell me about how you even knew where to go and how you found the wreckage.
Sure. Well, I think I mentioned there was a local farmer named Arnold Hansen who had assisted the crew as a spotter. And 10 years ago, when we were planning this memorial event, I had the good fortune to meet his son, Jerry Hansen. And Jerry, I guess, has worked for the timber company for many, many years and had secured permission for us to enter their land so that we could go and visit. He guided us to the crash site. Have you been in touch with Jerry Hansen?
No, but Jerry lost his father during the
Jerry
flood.
lost his father also in that crash.
Yes, he did.
Jerry's father was on board the aircraft.
Jerry was my boss's father when I worked at Humboldt State University.
Oh,
so
no
we're all,
kidding.
There's 1 degree of separation in Humboldt County. I'm telling
No
you.
kidding.
Everybody's
Yeah.
related.
So is he still around, Jerry? Is he
Jerry,
still around?
he is still around, but when I talked to the person who did the 40th, said he's probably not interested in doing. I mean, I think that he did his thing with the 40th anniversary and wasn't interested in doing it.
I can certainly respect that.
Yeah, I've talked to other people who did other video things, and they're like, I've done my thing with the flood, and I'm done
Yeah,
with it.
it's ancient history.
Yeah. And you brought back some pieces from the flood. What pieces?
We
You could
did,
just- yeah,
actually.
you could
We
hold
did
on.
actually. I helped myself to a memento, I guess, of my father and the service that he gave when we were there. This is a piece of the rotor, actually, from the helicopter. So I think it's great that the timber company has left the crash site undisturbed. I think that's very respectful.
Something
Oh.
happened with my camera.
Oh, okay. We'll just have a
Sorry
little
about
pause.
that.
We'll pick up with the rotor. It's
Never
funny,
done
you
that
splice
before.
it all together and no one will know that we did this in all these
Of
bits
course,
and
of course.
pieces.
The power of editing.
So what you got going?
It did a weird glitch on here. Shut itself off.
So I'll do the clapper thing again. Just so we do that just to synchronize the sound. Because the two cameras running it's easy to see an audio blip in the audio when you clap this thing together. It just makes such a visual.
A spike.
Are you?
If the way, it's doing a data recovery. Have you ever done that?
Oh my.
So when it's trying to recover when it's probably stalled before it shut itself. So it just kept there'll be pieces.
Luckily, we have the mic on this camera. So
Oh, nice.
That mic's on this camera, and that one's probably going. Is it pretty much?
It's only when the gusts.
Yeah.
For the most part, it's
Yeah, I'm hearing a little bit, and
You don't need to hide me from the sun now.
yeah,
That's
really,
not
it's
that
now
much
it's the
difference.
sun.
It's
is
yeah, it's
gone.
actually it's moving behind this tree. So
Yeah.
yeah.
we'll still use
No,
it.
we'll
though,
need it
because
for
we need
filming,
continuity
for
the
sure.
film.
Yeah, because it keeps the look the same. But that needs to move along.
Yeah.
Squawking bird.
We're almost there.
Yeah, we need a little break. A little break anyway. It's all good.
Yeah, I can use it.
Yeah, definitely.
Is that a gull? What is that?
I think that might be a blue heron or
A
something.
heron. Yeah, that might be a heron.
It almost sounded like a cackler. Canadian cackler, or is it
Oh,
Canadian
maybe
goose?
a Canada goose.
Canada goose?
Canada goose, or an Aleutian cackling goose.
There's two kinds. I didn't know
Good
that.
go. So
They
you
look
can
No,
the
there's
same.
more than two. There's
Oh,
like a
really?
whole slew of them, but those are our two main ones.
And they all look the
Clap
same.
there.
Okay, I can clap it here. Turn it around.
Clap on.
We have this whole Three Stooges routine we do with this whole
Nice.
thing.
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay, let's see where we're. Oh yes, talk about
The rotor.
the winds needs to stop. Stop. You know what, Robert? I'm just wondering. One thing is, if you could try putting the mic on his other side. I'm just wondering if you might block it more with your body. That might be.
Try that.
It's worth a try, I think, because you're so close to him that I'm thinking your body might block some of that wind. If it's going on. That little cotton ball is by where the mic hooks it down.
Yeah, nobody will notice that.
Nobody will know.
Movie magic.
But you can always play with the levels, right? If need be.
Yeah, it's just pulling out a roar sometimes pulls out, especially your deep voice. It's the same tone as your voice.
Ah, I
So
see.
it kind of wrecks your voice.
Ah,
Makes it sound
okay.
like you're talking in a little tin box, or it makes you, it pulls all the low notes out of your voice.
How's that?
Good.
Does it sound any better?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
Okay.
sounds
Good.
better. I think once you move in there too, that'll help too. Okay,
So we talked about how I found the crash site. Jerry Hansen was kind enough to take us to the crash site. I actually collected a piece of the aircraft as a sort of memento. This is part of the rotor, actually, from the helicopter. The entire crash scene is still there. The timber company has been gracious enough to leave it undisturbed all these years. Or at least it was 10 years ago. I couldn't say if it's still there now.
do you want to show the other piece that you have too?
I suppose this is part of a radar dome. It would appear to me some sort of covering for some sort of electronic instrumentation. So it was.
How long did it take you to hike into where it was at?
Oh, not long at all, because so much of it has been cleared now. We could drive within probably 20 to 30 yards of the crash itself at this point. Yeah, I think it was a very different scene 50 years ago when they really had to beat their way through, maybe a mile or more of very dense forest. I believe it took about 3 days for someone to reach the crash scene, if I remember correctly.
It did, yeah. It was kind of surprising to read about that and read how long it took them. But then, I mean, I think in these sunny days, it's hard to imagine, but it was pouring down. It was windy. It was hailing in some cases. I mean, it was miserable weather.
Well, and I think it was a very different forest than it is today as well. So much of it's been cleared now, but that wasn't the case 50 years ago.
How did people in Ferndale react? You told me a little bit about that on the phone.
It was really wonderful, honestly. 10 years ago when we did the 40th memorial, I was blown away. I was envisioning something very small, actually, mostly for my family. So my family came. At the time, my mother and brother were still alive. They came. My grandmother even came. And so we all trekked together from the Bay Area up to Eureka. And I guess I had envisioned just a really small sort of family scene, but no, there was quite an impressive memorial service. Dozens, if not hundreds, of photographs. Many hundreds of people. I guess 300 to 400 people probably arrived. It was at the Veterans Hall in Ferndale, and it was very heartwarming. And it was amazing to meet some of the people who actually met my father, who were rescued during the course of the day. That was quite wonderful. Coast Guard did a flyover for us, so they were really great to work with through all of that. Hopefully something similar, I don't know if something similar will happen on the 50th anniversary. I myself won't be able to be there this year at Christmas time, but certainly, ever in our thoughts. It's very normal, I think, whenever tragedy strikes, people try to find some reason why. And with a natural disaster, there isn't a reason why. I mean, nature does what it does to us, and we human beings muddle through as best we can. But it was definitely a great comfort to me and to my siblings, I think, to meet some of the specific people who were rescued. And so I just consider the point in history when this happened, young Americans were dying overseas for very abstract geopolitical reasons, but there was nothing abstract about my father's death. It was very clear it was in the service of Californians. I think all of us found that comforting.
Yeah, I think to be able to meet the people and just know, like, meet the children of the children,
Exactly.
And just know that life went on because of your dad.
Yeah, that definitely had a very strong emotional impact for all of us.
Immediately after the crash, though, was there some conflict with the people in Ferndale? You told me a little bit about that on the phone. It was something
there
that
was,
I never heard before.
yeah. So, and I didn't find much evidence of this, but when I was doing the research 10 years ago, one of the sources of information for me was an association of Coast Guard retirees, and apparently there was a bit of controversy after the crash because the autopsies of the flight crew, the blood analysis that was done, suggested the possibility that they had been drinking while they were operating that day. The people who gave me this information clearly didn't believe it at all. Clearly thought it was probably, the impact of the tragedy affected some people. It's understandable. Loss like that, people often will look for someone to blame. These former Coast Guard officers themselves explained to me that, the suits that flight crews wear when they're operating an aircraft, because these aircraft face the risk of having to ditch in the water. A long day in a suit like that changes your body chemistry in a way that, especially in 1964, could be misinterpreted in an autopsy done days later. So they were convinced that it was completely spurious accusations, and the Coast Guard never found any compelling evidence that it was the case. It's a shame, but I don't bear anyone any grudge for any emotions they experienced in the aftermath of a tragedy like this. It's really completely understandable.
Let's see. You answered some of the questions before I've even asked them. So, are you in touch with any of the survivors still, or?
I can't say that I've had any regular contact. Around this memorial 10 years ago, I had a few exchanges with a few of them, but no, we haven't really stayed in close contact. No.
And what does the Coast Guard do to help your family after something like this happens?
Well, I think the Coast Guard did a lot to try to help my mother after my father was lost. And so certainly, this is true for every branch of the service, there are veterans benefits that helped all of us. In fact, I don't think I would have made it through college, considering the circumstances of my youth. I probably never could have found a way to go to college and earn an engineering degree and have a career I've enjoyed without the help of the Veterans Administration and the benefits that they offer to survivors. So that's been a very important factor in my life. Of course, on the other hand, one never knows what life would have been like if this tragedy hadn't happened. So, but I will say this: it's definitely left a strong impression on me. And whenever I hear political discourse about, how well or how poorly we're taking care of our veterans, that's something that speaks a lot to me. I think that's not possible to do too much for veterans or for their families.
Do you do any sort of ritual, or do you have anything that you do to commemorate the date that it happened every year? Or do you take some time to think?
Well, I keep my father's service photo in sort of an honored place in the house. It's something that I guess I wish had been true all our lives, and it wasn't. So I certainly do that in my home now. And I do contribute to a memorial scholarship that I started at Humboldt State University. I'm afraid it's floundering a little bit right now. It needs some financial support. But I do, every year that I'm able, I contribute $1,000 to this scholarship fund in memory of this crew, USCG 1363 Memorial Scholarship, it's called, at Humboldt State. And would certainly hope anyone who's inclined would send a gift to the university. It's my hope that at some point we'll be able to make it perpetual. We've got a lot of money to raise in order to do that. I've actually just started thinking about a Kickstarter campaign. I think perhaps with the 50th anniversary coming up, it might be the time that we could reach out to networks of Coast Guard veterans, as well as people in the area who might want to help support that.
I think that's a great idea.
Kickstarter campaign.
Coast Guard, because of the fishing industry in that area, is near and dear. And you try and take the Coast Guard station away, and you will see people rise up in Humboldt County. It's
Well, that's
pretty
great.
amazing.
That's
People
great.
really do value the service of the Coast Guard in Humboldt County for sure. And Del Norte County, both of the coastal counties there.
I definitely got that sense. It's interesting when you look.
Stop.
Maybe that's the Coast Guard chopper giving us a flyover right now. Oh, please relax. Relax for a minute. We can't film right now anyway. That is not a Coast Guard chopper.
No, it's not? Okay.
No, that's not a Coast Guard chopper.
We're actually we're working with the Coast Guard to try and get out there, do some filming of the memorial, talk to them a little bit, and also to get up in the air a little bit.
Sure. Well, I'm sure the personnel have completely turned over at this point, because 10 years ago was a long time, and I don't think their tours of duty last so long. But boy, they were really terrific working with us 40 years ago. They did a lot of nice things for us.
Yeah, they just did a changing of the person who's in charge, changing of the guard, or I'm not sure.
Command.
Change of command.
Change of command. They just did that big event down there at the Coast Guard station.
Yeah.
So they did just change command. Yeah.
The one thing I think is interesting is I definitely got the sense of what you said a moment ago, that how much the Coast Guard's appreciated there. I find it interesting as I've traveled around the country, people have dramatically different views. Coast Guard has a very complex mission, I think, with respect to some of the other branches of the service, because part of it's search and rescue, part of it's law enforcement, part of it's immigration control, really very complicated, and so associated with that you see complex reactions to the Coast Guard. But I know certainly it was heartwarming to see how much they were clearly appreciated in Humboldt County.
And what we're hoping to do too is to put the information about your scholarship fund on the credits of the film too.
Oh, that
So
would be
we'll make
wonderful.
sure we
That would
get
be
all the
wonderful.
information
Yeah.
correct about
I
that.
think a Kickstarter campaign, the 50th is probably a good catalyzing moment to launch a Kickstarter. It takes $25,000. I think since I created the scholarship fund 5 years ago, it's been about $800 in contributions. Aside from mine have been actually funding the award each year. So I think there's been about $800 collected since then. So we've got a ways to go, but with enough people leveraging their social media networks, maybe we could have a successful Kickstarter.
I would definitely appeal to the Coast Guard and have them appeal to the fishing industry, because
Yes.
I think that's where kind of the rubber hits the road there in
Yeah.
Humboldt County. So yeah. Are there any other questions that you feel like we need to go back and retouch on? Okay. Do you have anything, Ted?
I just want to say thank you to you guys for doing the film to commemorate this. It's really great. People should not forget such events. They don't happen very often. This is a great way to memorialize it.
Yeah, and our focus really is not like a Weather Channel sensationalism of the event itself. We're really focusing on how people stepped up to do things to help other people, and how and also how, because of the way that people are in Humboldt and Del Norte and Trinity and Siskiyou counties, that's kind of the region we're covering, because they work with their hands so much, because they're problem solvers. I mean, these are the people you want to be around when there's a disaster, because they're able to step in and do things to fix things.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't know if I told you about this, but in Ferndale, after one of the earthquakes, one of the women that we interviewed, she said that LA had sent up a news crew, and they were very disappointed to find out that Ferndale had already cleaned up the earthquake debris.
Oh my.
So they couldn't film it. I
There
mean,
was nothing to show. Oh my.
But that's,
Well, I think that's
the-
probably stark contrast to what was it, the Fruit Ridge quake, they call it, years ago in Southern California. It took years and years to recover. Northridge. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. How did you end up back in San Francisco, or back in the Bay Area?
You know, it's a strange thing. I was 6 months old when we moved back east, and somehow or another, the West Coast had already imprinted itself on me. So I couldn't wait to get out of the Southeast. I couldn't wait to find my way west again. I ended up studying computer engineering at Clemson University in South Carolina. And of course, Silicon Valley is the center of the computer engineering universe. So it took me just shy of 30 years to find my ticket back here. And I've been here and left, and been here and left. And every time I leave, I end up coming back. So I guess this is where I'm meant to be.
You are like a salmon swimming back to your home here. You just
Yeah,
need to
pretty
be
much.
there.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's true. I've had the best personal and professional successes of my life here in the Bay Area. So I'm just a left coast kind of guy. I got from
Did you say left coast?
left coast. I'm a left
did.
coast kind of guy. From politics all the way through the whole spectrum to even my wine preferences. That's where I belong.
Well, you're in good company, I think, with this particular group too.
Great.
Well, do you want to get maybe a little B-roll, a little like maybe?
Let's get this silence here.
Oh, we got to get 30 seconds of silence just to make sure that we get just what if we need to fill
The
in
ambient,
some sound.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
can relax because we won't use it.
Well, I guess the only other thing I would say is this. I mean, I think it's kind of a shame actually if Jerry doesn't want to participate anyway, because I mean I have a special respect for his father. My father and the other crew members, they signed up for duty in the Coast Guard, and they knew when they signed up that they would put themselves in harm's way. Bud Hansen was just a local guy who stepped up to help and gave his life. So I think he deserves some special commemoration.
What we do plan on doing, like dedicating the film to all the people who lost their lives during the flood, and so we are going to run.
And I'm sure it's a long list. I know for me, I always focus on my dad and the crew, and I know that there are many others. I remember reading of I think a Marine chopper went down tangled in power lines at one point, and I know there were a lot of other people. The town of Pepperwood, is it, no longer exists. So I know I have a very, my mind of the telescope is all about the Coast Guard chopper, but yeah, that's good. That's good to remember everyone.
Yeah, and Pepperwood, actually, if you drove through it today, there are still a few homes there, and there are farm stands.
Oh, okay.
And so what people do is they stay there in the summertime. I don't think you can any longer build a house there unless you put it you'd have to put it way on stilts.
30 feet, 30-foot stilts.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
But people have big motorhomes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they pull them in there and then they pull them out every year. And so they're
Nice.
down there working their farms
Mhm.
and then they pull them out. So
Yeah.
if you drive through,
When
you
the
should
flood
drive through
season
and
comes.
stop because it's a great place
Nice,
to
nice.
bicycle cruise.
I seem to remember, some pretty tall poles with signs at the top saying high water mark, 30 feet above the ground, maybe, if I recall correctly. Pretty impressive. It was a serious flood.
So the interesting thing is that's the name of our film is High Water Mark.
High water mark.
Yeah.
Great
We just-
name.
I think we've released that now to the public.
Yeah.
We held it back a little bit for a long time.
Oh,
just
okay.
kind of waiting, trying different names and things, but High
Yeah.
Water Mark, because everybody in Humboldt County, especially, they'll be doing the interview and they'll go, well, you've seen the sign, the High Water Marks.
40 feet in the air, high water
Yeah.
mark. It's a great
So
name.
It's like it totally, everybody relates back to that sign. So we thought, it's kind of a double meaning because high water mark is really people doing the best that they can
Exactly.
in a situation.
I love it. It's a great double entendre.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I thought so. Yeah.
Nicely done. So what are your plans as far as the production and the release, and
Well, we have.
where and when's your premiere going to be?
Yeah, we have a couple more interviews to do. We're planning on. We've reserved the
I think you
theater.
can-
Yeah, you can put
you
it
don't-
down.
you can
Put
relax.
it down. Relax a little bit, Robert.
Shut these all up?
Yeah, you can shut things off. So on December 6th, and it's eerie because I've got a little there's a hesitancy.